Hello, welcome to the Believe series. Today on our program, we have LeeAnn Mallorie. Hi, LeeAnn. Really good to have you on.
Hi, Sonia. So great to be here.
Let me tell you a couple of things about LeeAnn before we jump in. Today, we're going to be talking about embodiment, and you might not even know what embodiment is, and that's why we have LeeAnn here, and specifically how embodiment can be helpful to you in terms of being a better leader. So let me tell you a little bit about LeeAnn. LeeAnn is an executive coach. I've known her for a number of years, and she, in addition to being a coach, she's a facilitator, but she just does a lot of things with enthusiasm, with energy, as you'll see both in what she's doing, but I just mean the kinds of programs that she offers. So let me show a couple of things to you. This is LeeAnn's Guts and Grace website, and this website, as LeeAnn and I were just talking about before the program, this is primarily targeted at women and at individuals. And then let me show you one other website that you can go to, which is Leading in Motion. And this is LeeAnn's website, especially for organizations. So we're thrilled to have LeeAnn with us, and we are going to be talking about embodiment. Hi, LeeAnn.
Hi. One of my favorite topics, so I'm happy to answer any questions y'all have.
Let's start with, for people who have never heard this word or have peripherally heard it, what is embodiment?
Embodiment is really trending right now, so it's a great time to be having this conversation. The way that I think about it is it's kind of a segment of what happens in the mindfulness space, but it's much more the aspect of mindfulness that's focused on living in the human physical body. Now you might go, are we ever not living in a body? Of course not. But so much of what we do day to day, especially in the corporate sector, but in general, as human beings in the world right now, so much of what we do is really about thinking. Being in our head, so much of what we get rewarded for is what we know and how smart we are and what degrees we have and all of the things that have a lot to do with our minds. Even some traditional mindfulness, it's much more about, can I calm the mind? Can I still the mind? Maybe I'm watching my breath, but really it's like what's going on in my mind. And embodiment actually invites us to bring our attention, our awareness much, much more down into the rest of ourselves. We might say like everything that happens below the neck. And often when I start to have that conversation with people, it's one of a couple of things. One, it might be, especially if I'm talking to women, well, I'm feeling a lot, but that's not really appropriate here. So can I just cut that off and make sure that's not getting in the way of my leadership? Or the other conversation is like, what do you mean what's below my neck? There's, I'm not paying attention to that. There's something down there, and it's kind of a joke, right? But how often do we actually pay attention? So like right now at this moment, I'm talking to you, but I'm also feeling my behind and the weight of myself on the chair and my feet on the ground. Most of us are not paying attention to all those things at the same time. But the truth is what's happening below the neck and in the rest of our body is both picking up a lot of information and transmitting a lot of information that impacts how we are as leaders. So the more that we can start paying attention to that, the more access we have to really what I would say is like all of our superpowers or all of our potential capacities as human beings.
Can you tell us a story of somebody who was skeptical about this whole below the neck or embodiment, who then had a change and actually it affected them in some way?
Absolutely. I could probably tell you a bunch. What pops into mind right now is did work a couple of years ago. Really, this was meant to be pretty traditional consulting work with a small firm, a couple of partners and the rest of their team. And the exec had hired me to coach him, but then he was like, yeah, let's come in and do some work with my team. And he was a person who, he worked with a naturopath, he worked with an acupuncturist, like he had a little bit of other stuff that was outside of his leadership that he was doing, but there was no integration whatsoever. It was like, oh, I go to those people, they fix my body, I go to work, I use my mind. So we got together and we actually had sort of a half-day team retreat. And there was a moment in that session where we got them together and we actually had them face one another and literally just start paying attention to what they were feeling. And then we moved them and stood them in several different positions. And what happened was just by being aware of the spatiality and what was happening in their physical bodies, it actually reflected a whole lot of what happens in their conversation dynamics and the way they were not playing well together as partners. So just bringing the awareness down there for a couple of minutes, it was like, we didn't talk. So they were like, I'm not sure what's happening. Is this going to work? They both were kind of judging the other for being in this practice together. And then when we started debriefing, they were like, that's exactly what happens back in the office in metaphor through the physical body. So pretty quickly, I would say they were believers, and it just opened up a lot of potential of things that were maybe hard to talk about, but we say the body doesn't lie. So they couldn't not see the thing when it was playing out in their physical dynamic.
What's an example of that? So somebody is standing with a partner. What is something that they might see in their body that is just this screaming, that is just speaking volumes?
So for example, with these folks, what happened was one of them, essentially the leader had brought in this other guy to be his partner, and he really wanted his partner to play an equal role. But he was such a driver, such a just such a power, such a force, right? And when he stood, he would lean in slightly. His body would get tenser. He's also a pretty big guy, so really large presence. And what happened was the other guy very subtly started to shrink back, to collapse, to kind of pull. So he could feel that happening in his body. And he's like, wow, this is what it's like when you're telling me when you're telling me to take a step, but you're kind of transmitting at the same time, like, I don't really want you to do that, basically.
That's really helpful. I mean, just the way you described it, you could feel that physical dynamic, which they both immediately could translate to their work dynamic.
Exactly. Yeah. So in so many examples, but really it's like, in some ways it's a metaphor and then it's not, right? Because those things are both, while they're in the conversation about, hey, do this, but I don't really want you to do this, we're actually doing those things with our bodies, but we're often not aware, we're not paying attention.
So when that happens, when your body conveys one signal, but you're saying something else, what's the thing to change?
It depends which one is more aligned with your values. So there's not a cookie cutter answer, right? I mean, the thing about embodiment that's interesting, many folks will be familiar with Amy Cuddy's work on power poses that came out a couple of years ago. And in her work, to do research, you kind of have to be this way, but it's a bit prescriptive. It's like, stand this way, you get this particular result that you want. The truth is, though, this lack of coherence is a starting point for a conversation. So in a coaching context, in a facilitation conversation, we get curious about that. Well, do you really want to be actually inviting him to come forward? If so, you need to shift something about what your body's transmitting, or even use what's happening in your body to maybe heal something or open something or get more familiar with what's actually the other story that's running there. Or maybe it's like, oh, well, I'm saying this thing, my body's doing this thing. What I really mean is what my body is doing. So it might be that it's time to actually get more honest about what we're saying and change the plan or change the rules that we're trying to play by. So it can really go in both directions.
That's really interesting. I actually wasn't sure what you were going to say to that, because you just a few minutes ago told us the body doesn't lie. So I was wondering if you were going to stick to that. You said, no, what aligns with your values? What's important for you?
Well, in other words, ultimately, you're not going to make the body lie, right? So it's not about faking it, but it's about, if the body's saying something or doing something that's not aligned with what you're aiming for, you might actually have to do some reconciling. And I think that's what's really interesting about the work. So it's not prescriptive. When you get really deep into the work and some of the lineages that I'm trained in, it's much more a place to learn from. And ultimately, and you kind of nailed this already, Sonia, the experience of coherency is kind of the holy grail. So the moment when my body, my mind, my thoughts, my values, my intentions all line up, and boom, then you get somebody who's really compelling. Then you get teams that actually trust each other. Then you get conversations that go the way you'd like, because you're not transmitting 2 or 3 different things. You're actually super clear and you're super aligned.
Then let me ask you, in the context of this, in the context of embodiment, and let's look at your work as a coach to leaders. What is it that you believe that other coaches may not think about or may not believe?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I guess I believe that the information that your body has to offer is equally, if not more important than other things. And other things could be, I mean, your thoughts, right? What you say you're going after. Generally, yeah, I mean, I would say generally I believe that. And I think much of what I'm interested in is coherency, like we've already said, and also range. So I'm a big growth mindset person, if we use that particular lineage of research. I believe that it's possible to actually change or evolve. And I also believe it's possible to expand your range to develop new skills or new habits or even new ways of being that just aren't what you've done in the past that have been successful. So a lot of the work I do with coaching is really at a moment where somebody needs to level up and they're like, I don't know, at that next level, that's just not me. I've never been able to do that before. That's not something that I actually can do. And because our bodies, our minds, and all of the other aspects of ourselves are working against us, it is hard to change. But what I've seen is that when you start to get the body more involved, it's actually easier to begin to make pivots or add things to your toolbox or open up in ways where it's not like you're not going to be, a controlling driver anymore. Maybe that you still need that skill sometimes, but also if we want to say, oh, let's add some soft skills, or let's add something that's a bit, different approach, by following the wisdom of the body and opening through these kinds of processes, I see people change much more deeply and much more sustainably.
So deeper, it's kind of a deeper change that you're saying happens.
Yeah. I mean, I think these days, probably most coaches wouldn't say, or most people wouldn't say it's not possible to change. Although I think, 10, 15, 20 years ago, it was like, well, no, just do what you're good at. Like, don't try to expand, don't try to become something else. I think the whole discourse is evolving. So I'm probably not that different than other people, but I do think that the change becomes more real. It becomes more sustainable. It becomes less like faking it and more like a new aspect of yourself. And often what I find is that those things that we want to bring online aren't not parts of ourselves, that they actually often are, but maybe through some kind of either early career trauma or something that happened along the way in our lives, even like our early childhood, that stuff gets locked down, gets stuffed, gets pulled off the table as a valid aspect of ourself or a valid aspect of ourself at work. So some aspect of that is also like a reincorporation. Sometimes there's a healing or a letting go of the past in some way that has to happen for that to become part of you, not just like I can put it on, but it becomes a natural part of you again.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you the question, but first I'll ask our audience something. I'm going to ask you the question, what is one thing we should all do after having spent this morning with you? So I'll ask you that in a moment. To everybody who's listening, start thinking about what is your takeaway from what LeeAnn has been saying, and what is a way that embodiment makes its way into your life? How are you becoming more aware of your body in order to help you move forward? So sort of a question for you on your takeaway and your awareness. And LeeAnn, what should people do?
I want to make it very concrete. So in places, situations, moments in your leadership where you're not getting exactly the results that you want, or maybe you are getting results that you want, but there's something more you're looking for, start paying attention to what your body is doing in the moments when you're having the conversations, in the meetings, doing the actions that actually drive something forward, and just start tracking. It could be that you notice nothing. It could be that you notice, wow, I'm saying I'm really open, but I'm super tight and rigid in my skin. Or it could be that you notice that in some way there's a lack of coherency, and, just start getting curious. Sometimes I'll say the beginning of the change process is kind of like a pay attention to pattern interrupt. You don't even have to know what to do instead. Often you'll figure it out over time. So I wouldn't say like, oh, then just do the opposite, but just start paying attention, like what is actually running here? That's not just what I think is running.
So look for the places that you're stuck or where you're not getting what you'd like to be doing. And those places, pay attention to what's happening in your body.
Yep.
I really love your idea of pattern interrupt. And I love that because it's sort of the minimal goal coaching wise. If I observe something, I don't have to write a 10-page dissertation on the actions I'm going to take or like you said, look for what the opposite is, but just try something else, experiment with something else.
Yeah, sometimes already just not doing the original thing. I mean, what it creates is a vacuum, which is kind of terrifying. But it's only in that vacuum that an authentic new action can start to come forward. So often we'll skip that middle step of just the pause or the interrupt and try to put the new thing in place. We call that like putting a new habit on top of an old shape or an old pattern. You actually create that moment of opening, or if we're talking about a longer coaching horizon, there might be months of opening where you're a little bit kind of in the soup of, I'm not really sure what's next, but it creates a possibility for something real to come through.
Yeah, it sounds, you mentioned coherence. It sounds coherent. It sounds like really just listening and paying attention to that whole range of what it could be.
Yeah, and sometimes it's like, oh, what's really there is I'm mad or I'm sad about something.
It's very
whole other conversation, but sometimes it's just attend to what's there and, maybe let it run for a while or whatever else needs to happen. There's a world, but that's a starting point.
We're getting some answers, and we'll get to them in just a moment. So let us know your takeaway. What is a takeaway you have from what you've heard from what LeeAnn said this morning? LeeAnn, this has popped into my head about 3 times since we've been talking. What is your belief about fake it till you make it? And I can ask that more specifically, but let me, because you and I speak that language, but maybe not everybody. What is your belief about if you're not very confident and you're about to do a presentation to 6 people, or you're, let's start with that. Should you fake it a little bit till you make it or not?
One of the things you're going to learn about me is that most of my answer is always it depends. I know that can be maddening, but actually I think part of the problem in a way, I mean, my MAP thesis from our shared graduate program was on practical wisdom, which is knowing the right thing to do in the right moment. And for me, again, embodiment, coherency, practical wisdom, these pieces that are like, well, it depends on what the context is calling for, or who you are, or why you're coming to this change process. So I actually would never give a blanket answer like, yes, fake it till you make it, or no, don't. I get asked that a lot because I do embodiment work. And the truth is sometimes it's totally the wrong move to just put on something else over top. It's actually just going to get you stuck. Sometimes, depending upon where you're coming from and why and what's true for you, actually, especially if you have a depth of understanding of why the thing you're trying on is the right thing to try on, just trying it on, even if it doesn't feel totally true, is totally fine. And it will be part of the pathway to get there. Another way to talk about that in the somatics discourse is meaning, I'm realizing I'm using the word somatics, haven't used it yet. So somatics, the whole being in its livingness, also a word that's used a lot in the embodiment or embodied leadership space. And the idea here is that there are new practices we need to cultivate. And also there's maybe opening or healing or unraveling or re-raveling that needs to happen. Those are kind of big words in the leadership space, but like something actually needs to get a little bit fuzzy before it can get reformed again. And at a different moment in the process of transformation, one of those moves might be the right move. And at a different moment in the process, it might actually, again, get you stuck or override something that's wanting to happen that's different than just a new habit. So
I actually love your answer. You said it's mad. I actually love your answer because it seems like it fits depending on what it is. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it just, and I love the experimentation angle of it. It depends where you are in your cycle. It depends how much you want to learn, what you're learning from trying that on. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I also understand what you're saying by you could be blocking things down or sort of pushing things down by trying something that's not the right thing at the right time.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Here are some comments we're getting in terms of what people are taking away. So Katarina says that she's taking away the language of the key of coherence and the importance of body language. Thank you, Katarina. So it seems like people are really paying attention to this coherence idea that you're. Can you say a little bit more about coherence?
I'm sure I could. What in particular do you think would be useful, Senya? Like what direction you want me to take that?
How do you know if you are going towards coherence, and how do you know if you're moving away from it?
Yeah. Often when I teach about this work, like there are different pieces of one's embodiment. So there's the thought, stories, narratives. There's literally what's happening in your physical body, like the emotions, these kinds of things. There's the actual shape, tight, locked, loose, bent, forward, all these things that we can do with our bodies. There's the thoughts that I have. One way to track coherency is, are all those things actually lined up, or are they running different programs? Are they running different things? Usually, so that's like a technical answer. In the moment, often it can just be like something's off. This doesn't feel right. It might feel like a gut instinct, or it might feel like you're pushing too hard or trying to make something happen sometimes. Or it can be literally that you feel fine or you think you're fine, but you're getting input from the outside that doesn't match your own self-assessment. So sometimes that'll be like, oh, I got a 360 assessment and it says I'm a jerk. And actually, I think I'm really nice. And we're like, okay, well, lack of coherency is at play here. Like, what are they actually seeing? What are you actually intending? And where's the mismatch happening? And again, is it in your words? Is it in your body language? Is it in something else that we haven't named yet? So to work towards coherency, the key ingredient is almost always curiosity. what's happening here? Because we don't want to do that, right? We want to be like, either fix it or I want it to go away. The more curious you can get about a lack of coherency, the more I think likely you are to grow, and the more possibilities start to show up.
Coherence, curiosity. I once heard that in coaching training at the program that I've talked about it before in these broadcasts. I went through the Strozy program, and one of the coaches told us, you are your leader's curiosity for them, or you can be, one of the ways that you engage in coaching. And I just think that's almost poetic.
I love that. It's really true. I think sometimes half the battle is also just supporting a client to not judge what's happening, and to, like you said, get curious, because it's so easy to be frustrated, because it's not, this isn't a path that's about, I often will say, like, I'm not the person who teaches the top 10 things you should do to be a good leader. Like, that's just not what I do. I'm much more like, how do you be more you, and how do you be more coherent, and how do you actually find the real pathways, which isn't a cookie cutter thing, and it doesn't always happen quickly. It can happen quicker than you think, but it requires this surrender and this curiosity and this pause in some cases.
My last two questions for you. When you started getting into the work of embodiment, what was something that was an aha moment for you that you really enjoyed and took away for yourself?
Oh, so many things. One thing I remember really starkly, so we share the lineage of the Strozy Institute. I've trained there since 2007 and currently teach programs for them. There was a moment, I was about a year into my training, so it wasn't very beginning. And the founder called me up and was doing some work with me. And he was like, basically, he gave me a reflection that I appeared coherent. And I was like, I can't feel anything. I'm completely fogging you. So what I learned is that I had such a performer body, essentially, that I could basically make people look like I was completely grounded in myself, like fully present in there, and be 100% dissociated, or maybe like 80% dissociated. Coming from a background of being bullied a lot as a kid, like just difficult childhood stuff, it had it be that I learned to look like I was fine and just not be in my body at all. And enough so that I was able to fog him in that moment. So it was really the beginning of a path for me to go, oh, it's not just about the shape. It's also like, am I in there? And am I feeling? And what else is happening as well that's part of this coherency and part of this embodied leadership conversation?
That sounds like such a big thing to take in.
I guess that comes back to the fake it till you make it, right? Like some part of me, and this is why I would never say you should do this or you shouldn't, right? Some part of me was actually really good at the fake it, or really good at the kind of getting it in the places that it needed to be. I was also a trained athlete. Like I could make my body do what it needed to do. But there was more.
Yeah. And my last question is, what are your ending thoughts that you would like to leave the people who are with us today with?
Oh my goodness. 10 years ago, I said embodiment's going to be the next thing. And I think it's taken a little while. But I think if you haven't heard of it before, start listening, because now it'll be like the white Prius. You see the white Prius, then you see the white Prius again and again and again. Like you're going to start hearing it everywhere. It's a beautiful rabbit hole. If you have any curiosity from this session, read books, go down the rabbit holes, basically just trust your gut. And you will probably find puzzle pieces that are useful in some way to your leadership. So just like curiosity, get curious about embodiment and let yourself be wowed, I guess, or swept in some way. It's just such a beautiful conversation right now. And many, many, many more people doing the work now than ever before.
Thank you so much, LeeAnn, Mallorie. Thank you so much. Thank you. And we will see everybody here Monday to Friday, 11 a.m. Pacific. We're always here for our 20-minute information sessions. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Tanya. Bye, everyone.